Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So I am here to film possibly my most requested video ever. Aside from all of the show us your goats requests, this is my most requested video. So I am here to tell you guys how I read so much. I read a lot, and now that I'm doing monthly wrap-ups again, it's starting to become very apparent how much I read. I read a lot more than the average reader, and I am fully aware of that, and I acknowledge that. So I am here to show you what I do, but I have two disclaimers for this video. I don't normally like putting disclaimers in my videos because you're gonna watch it regardless, just because I feel kind of strongly about these two things. So disclaimer number one, you do not need to read as much as I read. There is a huge controversy, specifically on BookTube nowadays, about numbers and about the amount that you read and what's acceptable, what's not, why is it a thing. It's a huge thing. So I'm here to tell you this is not me saying you need to read as much as I read. This is not me saying this is how people should be reading. This is just me answering the question for everybody who is curious. So numbers are not important to me. I just happen to read a lot because that's what I choose to do with my time. I have a kitten in the library now, by the way, too, so she's gonna be bopping around in the background because she lives in here now. And disclaimer number two is audiobooks count as reading. I will die on this hill. Okay. If that is a deal breaker for you, you should probably click out of this video because I'm going to talk about audiobooks and it is how I read so much. For some reason, it is a big thing nowadays that for some reason, a lot of people have it in their heads that listening to audiobooks do not count as reading. I'm here to tell you that, in my opinion, it does. One, because that's somewhat offensive to people who have vision problems and might not be able to physically read books. Two, I am still consuming the story. I can still answer all of the questions about the story, the plot, the characters. I still have absorbed the story into my brain noggin noodle. So I'm here to let you know early that, in my opinion, audiobooks count as reading. Listening to audiobooks at a faster pace still counts as reading. I don't know why that's a new thing that's popped up, or for some reason people who think that you listen to an audiobook at a faster speed, that counts as not reading it, as opposed to listening to a slow speed, as opposed to reading. I don't know. It's a whole thing. So those are my two disclaimers. So that's going to segue me into the actual meat and potatoes of this video. How do I read so much? Main answer, audiobooks. I am very fortunate enough that I work a job that I can have a headphone in and be listening to audiobooks. So I work a full-time job, so 40 hours a week. I am listening to an audiobook, plus any of the extra commuting time that I have, any other downtime that I might choose to listen to an audiobook while I'm doing things around the house, or just in general when I listen to audiobooks. That is a huge part of how I get through books. Now, I know that not everybody is privileged enough to have a job that is mindless enough that you can put on an audiobook while you work, so I understand. That's a huge portion of my reading. That's when it gets done. So that is definitely not going to be the case for everybody. But I am here to talk about audiobooks and how I listen to them, how I got into them, and what might help you out with audiobooks. So I am planning on making an entire video separately about all of the apps and programs that I use, so I will save that for that video. But it comes down to the fact that I use a lot of different programs. I have Overdrive, I have Hoopla, I have Audible, I have a whole bunch of things that I use, so I kind of have a constant supply of audiobooks on hand. Now, if you're one of those people who just really can't focus on audiobooks, can't get into audiobooks, your mind wanders, I'm here to tell you I was one of those people too. I just really didn't get it. I started listening to audiobooks, I want to say probably 7 or 8 years ago. It's been a long time. And that was when I got my very first really monotonous job, way back in the day, that I was allowed to have headphones in for. And once I got comfortable there, I could feel my brain cells dying. So I needed something to stimulate my mind while I was working. So I turned to audiobooks and I struggled. I struggled like a lot of you guys are probably struggling. I couldn't focus on it. It was really slow and tedious and monotonous to listen to them. I realized that a big portion of my issue with that was the fact that audiobook narrators read books slow, and they're told to do that. That's a big part of audiobooks. It's read at a pace that you can slowly absorb the story and get into the atmosphere. They actually read the book slower than an average person talks. That's a thing. It's not just in your head. So a game changer for me was figuring out that you can change the playback speed, because I am one of those people, when I'm physically reading a book or when I'm talking or thinking, everything works really quickly in my head. I read fast, and I think I was struggling with audiobooks because they read so slowly, especially in big climactic moments, the big reveal at the end of the book. they're still reading at a very slow, calm pace. And it drove me insane. And I was like, this is the point in which I would be like flipping the pages like crazy to figure out what's going on and do everything. So when I learned that you can speed the book up a little bit, it was a game changer for me. So I'm basically here to tell you guys how I kind of trained myself to speed things up, because I know that sounds weird, and if you've ever listened to an audiobook at like a crazy fast speed, it doesn't sound like English. Like, it sounds like gibberish. So how I did it was basically you can increase it in very small increments. Like, there's normal playback speed, which is 1 time. You can increase it to 1.25. And it takes a little bit. It took me a couple hours of listening to it at a faster pace, of really having to focus. Like, you have to really dedicate your brain to like keeping up with how they're speaking. And I promise you, after like a couple hours of that, your brain will just acclimate and it'll sound amazing. Like, it'll sound perfectly normal to you. Listen to it at that speed for like a couple weeks or a couple months, however long it takes for you to like realize that that's normal, and then do the process over again. I've been doing that for years. I listen to books at 3 times the speed now, which I know is crazy. And I know a lot of people have kind of a peak point that they can't process beyond, which is fine. A lot of people stop at like 1.5 or 1.75 or something like that. Then there's crazy people like me that just like keeps going, because I just kind of did it as a challenge. But I'm also here to tell you that if you do this and you ever try and go back down, like if you ever try and listen to a book with a friend, which I have done, slowing it back down is the most ridiculous sounding thing you've ever heard. Once you're at a high speed, I'm just here to tell you, if you try and go back down to 1 time speed, like normal speed, it sounds like the most ridiculous slow motion you've ever heard in your life. So that's just a little disclaimer for you guys. So that right there is how I get through a ton of audiobooks. Because like I said, I work 40 hours a week. I also live in the middle of nowhere. So whenever I have to drive somewhere, it's a solid 20 minutes to half an hour away, one direction. So like going to work is a half-hour drive for me. So it's a half hour there, half hour back. That's an hour spent in the car that I can listen to an audiobook. And if I'm listening to an audiobook at double speed, that's technically 2 hours of the audiobook that I've listened to just in my commute that day. All of that adds up over time. So that's basically how I got to the point where I basically listen to a book a day. It depends on the book, it depends on my mood. Sometimes I'm in a slump and don't feel like listening to anything, but an average audiobook is between, I want to say between 8 to like 10 or 11 hours. That's a normal size average book. Yes, there are books that are like 35 hours long, or there are books that are like 2 hours long. But the average book is somewhere between 8 to like 10 or 11 hours. So if you're listening to that at a fast speed, you can get through a 10-hour audiobook in 5 hours, or faster speed, you can get through it in like 3.5 hours. Do you see what I'm saying? So basically, my commute to work, working for like 7 or 8 hours, and my drive home, I can get through at least a book, if not more than that. All right, so I just talked about audiobooks for like way too damn long, but that kind of is going to move me into my next topic of conversation, if you will, which is prioritizing it. I have reached a point in my life where, honestly, because I listen to so many audiobooks, it's kind of my preferred method of entertainment. There are some nights where I prefer to honestly pop in some headphones and sit on the couch and listen to an audiobook and play Candy Crush on my phone for hours. Like, honestly, that's more appealing to me than turning the TV on or playing a video game or something at that point. This is just my preferred method of entertainment, which again is not going to be the case for everybody, but it's just what I do. Oh, kitten's coming for another round. There she goes. She's just investigating everything. So that's something that is just specific to my case. I honestly prefer to either read or listen to audiobooks if I have free time. In fact, when I'm in like a reading slump, it takes an embarrassing amount of time for me to realize that I can even turn on the TV or that I can do other things. Like, it doesn't even occur to me to do other stuff when I have free time. And that's just specific to me. That's just because I happen to read a lot and it's what I enjoy. It's how I prefer to consume media. So that's obviously not going to be the case for everybody, but it is for me, which is fortunate because that contributes to BookTube. Like, you gotta be reading to be on BookTube, so that's a thing that is a win-win for me. But that is kind of my next point that I want to make, even if that's not necessarily true to you all the time. Prioritizing reading is just a thing that will keep you in the habit of it. Like, instead of just sitting in bed and scrolling through your phone for like an hour before you go to sleep, take that hour to read. or if you come home from work and you need to like unwind for a little bit, pick up a book versus scrolling through your phone or versus turning on the TV. That's just what works for me, and that's a really good way for me to just like chill out, because I'm a very introverted person and reading is just a way for me to decompress and re-energize and everything, because I'm one of those people that I get overly stimulated very quickly, and reading is just a very quiet and solitary activity that I can use to decompress from a day. So my entire day of working, of reading a book or listening to a book, I will come home and decompress by reading a book. I know I lead a very sad existence, but it is what it is. So on the topic of prioritizing reading though, I have kind of a whole discussion that I want to open up to you guys, and it's something that I've talked about with a lot of my friends, and it's just something that's very apparent to me right now and that everybody seems to struggle with, that is kind of a good point to make for you guys for this video that will help you guys out. We live in an age where everybody's addicted to their phones. That's just kind of a very common thing. It's not as like, oh my God, anymore. Everyone's just kind of accepted the fact that like it's hard to survive without your phone at this point. This has also led to us really struggling with focusing on things that aren't instantly gratifying. That's something that I've learned about myself, and that a lot of people are starting to be aware of the fact. Because we are constantly scrolling on our phones, you have a constant influx of information that is instantly satisfying to you. Whether it's scrolling through social media until you're caught up on where you were, when you've reached that point of like, oh no, there's nothing else for me to consume on this, you can just switch over to another app and do the same thing, and then switch to another, and then cycle back through. It's a horrible cycle to be stuck in. And honestly, it's a problem at this day and age, because it's very hard to focus on things for a specific amount of time that isn't like 15 seconds of gratification of like, you need a piece of information, you can look it up and move on. So a lot of people have been commenting on the fact, specifically like in my book group, I've had a lot of conversations about this, or with friends, where we are all really frustrated with the fact that it's really hard to sit down and get lost in a book for hours and hours on end like we did when we were kids. And I feel like, one, that's part of growing up. We have a lot of other things that our brains can focus on. We have a lot of other things to worry about and stress about. But two, it's the day and age that we live in. We are just constantly used to instant gratification because of smartphones and because of the world that we live in and the internet. It's something that I can admit about myself. Even if I sit down and read for an hour, at the end of that hour, I'm like itching to get back to scrolling on my phone or looking online or doing something like instantly gratifying. Basically, my solution to this issue is productivity apps, specifically one that I use that's called Forest. I believe there's a free version of this. I will put them both in the description. I don't know if I can link an app in the description, but I'll put the names of them down there. Basically, it is an app where you set a certain amount of time on your phone to essentially like put your phone away. I know you guys have probably heard of productivity apps or things similar to this, but I'm just going to tell you about the one that I use that works really well for me. There are tons of different things and levels of locking apps that you can use, but this one works really well for me just because of how it is. Let me explain it to you guys. So the one that I use is called Forest, and basically what you do is it's a little cartoon tree that you set a timer for. You can set it for like 15 minutes, you can set it for an hour, you can set it for 2 hours, whatever you want to do. You set a timer and you hit plant. It plants a seed, and over that course of whatever the set time is, it grows a tree. And basically, if you use your phone during that amount of time, if you leave that app, it kills your tree. The guilt alone on that works for me. Definitely different types of productivity apps that will actually lock you out of specific apps on your phone. It'll lock you out of social media. It will lock you out of your phone so you can't even unlock your phone. But this one is a very simple one. That's all it is. You're literally growing a little cartoon tree, and if you use your phone in that amount of time, it kills your tree. It works. Honestly, it's a very simple concept, but the guilt alone of like murdering a little tree is enough to like make me stay off of my phone. So that is honestly what I use for readathons. That's what I use for reading when I'm struggling with reading and I'm struggling with not picking up my phone. I also use it for sleeping. Like, it's a thing that I've started to realize about myself, is that like it's really hard to put your phone down at night, and it's really bad for you to just scroll on your phone all night long. So basically when I'm reaching the point where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna read for like an hour and then I'm gonna go to sleep, I will set the timer for like 2 hours so that I have 2 hours that I can't pick my phone up, and usually at the end of the 2 hours, I can be asleep at that point. It has worked wonders for my reading life, for my sleeping life. I'm gonna highly recommend it to you guys. But that is honestly the secret that I have for sitting down and physically reading books. Lock yourself out of your phone. Don't have distractions. But I guess what it comes down to, moral of the story, you have to want to read. And that's honestly what it comes down to though. You just have to prioritize it. If you want to read, you'll make time to read. Like if it's an activity that you thoroughly enjoy, you'll make time for it. And if it's something that you struggle to like get over that hump, use the productivity apps because it works wonders. Because for me, I might not necessarily be like in the mood to read, but I need like maybe 10 or 15 minutes to get myself in the world of the book, and then I'm in. But for some reason, that first 10 or 15 minutes of reading, I have that like constant pull towards other things in my life. So if I have something to like really help me focus on it, that does the trick for me. So moral of the story, I'm just a weirdo and I just read a lot. I consume a lot of books every single month because one, it's something to keep my mind busy while I'm doing other monotonous tasks such as work or such as house cleaning or cleaning my barn or just doing things around the house. 2, prioritize it. You just have to want to read. And 3, shut yourself out of your phone for a little bit and see if it helps you out, because it worked wonders for me. So that's kind of it for this video. If you guys have any questions, if you guys have any tips or tricks for anybody else, leave them down in the comments. Maybe someone else will be able to relate to what you do instead versus what I do, or I'm always looking for ways to like improve my reading experiences. I hope that it was somewhat helpful for you guys, and I hope it answered the burning question of how do you read so many books? That's pretty much how. So that's gonna be it. I will see you guys in my next video.